Greetings, metalheads, and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George, and today I'm back with the third installment of Metal Head to Head, where I am, for basically no reason other than because I can, putting two of my choice albums from the same band head to head, facing them off against each other. Which album do I prefer? And I'm trying to keep this as being reasonably kind of evenly matched and pushing the boundaries, going for the difficult choices here. So far I've covered Immortal, then I covered Cannibal Corpse. This time, for the third installment, we are sticking with death metal, and we are going with New York Death Metalers, formed in around 1988, I believe, the legendary Immolation. Now, this band is such a reliable band. Over the years, they have not released a bad album, in my opinion. Nothing but quality, top-notch death metal. Immolation have such a distinct and defining sound. They really do have such a key identity that is like no other band. No other band, although many will try and emulate the mighty Immolation, no other band can quite replicate their iconic signature sound and style. So, Immolation are an interesting band for me because I got into them in 2013 with, I was going to say a much more recent album. I suppose that's only 11 years ago, but it was actually with Kingdom of Conspiracy. So when this album came out in 2013, I was still very much discovering death metal, extreme music in general. But the thing that really staggered me, really bowled me over from the very start, from my first encounter with Immolation, is just how freaking heavy they are. No, it doesn't have to be a million miles per hour fast, nor does it have to be crazy, wild, technical. Immolation do old school death metal, but extremely freaking well and extremely heavy. They don't need all the other bells and whistles. They just do the old school stuff, but heavier than anyone else. Certainly, that's my opinion anyway. So I was totally blown away by Kingdom of Conspiracy. I'd never heard anything that extreme. I think the most extreme thing up to that point that I had heard was probably Cannibal Corpse, with albums like Torture, which, say what you like about Cannibal Corpse, I personally really rate them, and that album, Torture and Kill, were some of the first introductions for me into death metal. But Kingdom of Conspiracy blew that away. I then picked up a copy of Close to a World Below. Album number 4 from, I think it was 2000? Yeah, from 2000. This was unimaginably extreme. In comparison to Kingdom of Conspiracy, this was the next frickin' level. And I still maintain that this is an unreasonably heavy death metal album. But we're not going to put those together. We're not going to put those head to head. As I progressed into discovering more albums from Immolation, I then delved right back to the beginning with the 1991 debut. This is the rather majestic Dawn of Possession. So this album is a great album, but I do think very much was the debut. They were very much finding their feet. Immolation, in my opinion, started to really come into their sound with the second album, which is an all-time favourite of mine, Here in After, which was released in 1996. This album sees Immolation honing their sound. They're really coming into their own. Not to discredit that debut, Dawn of Possession, at all, because it is a crushing album. But it was that second album, Here and After, that I started to really, really appreciate Immolation and their distinguishing, defining sound. So that's going to be our first contender, Here in After, because it is a brutal album, defining, signature, as I say, but just freaking brilliant, start to finish. I then picked up this little beast. This is album number 3 from 1999. This is Failures for Gods. Failures for Gods, multiple. This album is, wow. This is, again, an unreasonably heavy album. This is the closest contender against Hereinafter, in my opinion. Not just because it is chronological, you know, this is album number 2 and album number 3, but because it is an absolutely crushing album. Now, interestingly, I've always kind of lumped these two albums together. And for some reason completely unknown to me, I had it in my head that this was the debut for a long time, thinking that was album number 2. But when you put these two albums together, certainly you look at their artwork, they very much sit comfortably together. Although I think that this album, Hereinafter, album number 2, is still rooted a little bit more in the kind of traditional old school death metal sounds and styles of the debut album, Dawn of Possession. It's close, quite close to what they have gone on to become in terms of definitely an old school death metal band, but bearing a lot more of the kind of brutal death metal characteristics as well, with the absolutely immense breakdowns, you know, changing from like blast beat tempo and then taking you right through a nice dirgy, almost death doom passage as well. But I've always kind of coupled these two albums together, and both of them I absolutely love. These are two of my favourite Immolation albums, and I think a lot of Immolation fans would agree that these two albums sit quite highly in their estimations and rankings. No discredit to any of the other Immolation albums. In fact, this whole review was born of the fact that I was daring to try and tackle the album ranking of Immolation, which is still in the pipeline. But as you can probably tell, I love Immolation. They have a lot of great albums, and it's proving to be immensely difficult. So, Metal Head to Head, Hereinafter from 1996, up against album number 3, Failures for Gods from 1999. So, what do I love? Which one of these two albums do I love the most? Well, first of all, we'll analyse Hereinafter. This album is not overly long. It's less than 40 minutes, somewhere between sort of 35 to 40 minutes. And it is essentially ridiculously good old school death metal. Of course, it's more than just that. It's quite complex in its nature. I think it's not overly technical. There's not getting into the sort of tech death territory, but it feels like quite a dynamic and diverse album. Whereas some old school death metal albums kind of cling on to the more thrashy side of things. You know, it's all about speed. It's all about, you know, having a bit of a thrashy section, a bit of a breakdown, throw a few blast beats in there, put some gutturals in there, and away you go. Immolation have always kind of edged more on the complex side of things, and this lineup did it really freaking well. So this lineup consisted of Ross Dolan on bass and vocals. Now I will say Ross has been there since the beginning, and his vocals are fantastic. I think that he is a fantastic vocalist in that his vocals pretty much stay the same, consistent. They have stayed the same right since the early days up till now. You know, still sounding very much the same. You know, time hasn't had too much of an impact there, but there's something about the guy's vocals. It's almost like demonic in its monotone, low. It's not like a traditional guttural, essentially. It's something else. It's monstrous and maniacal in the sense that there's total clarity. You know, you can hear the lyrics here. There's no low-end gargling or anything like that. You can hear pretty much everything that Ross is singing. It is just that it's so low and ominous. He's got a really ominous vocal style. Alongside Robert Vigner, who's also been there since the early days. Robert is a fantastic guitarist, absolutely fantastic. Riffs galore here. Then we've got Thomas Wilkinson on guitars and Craig Smolowski on drums. So there's only one lineup change between this and Failures for Gods, and that's the departure of Craig. We'll get onto that in a moment. So this is 8 tracks, as I say, less than 40 minutes long, but there is not a bad track here. There is also not a track that you can't sort of distinguish from the next or the previous. The album kicks off with Nailed to Gold. Wow, what a track. This is not, lyrically, this is not going to appeal to many Christians, as it is very anti-Christian. It is very, I'm not going to say satanic, but it is very anti-religion, anti-organised religion. And Nailed to Gold is a diabolical masterpiece. It packs some seriously crushing riffs. There is a lot of groove and stuff that you can kind of headbang along to. You know, you've got these crushing, weighty riffs, but you've got groove there. You've got a pace. Some tracks are faster than others. Some tracks are a little bit more doomy. But to be honest, overall, it's a good mix. It's a really good mix. But Nailed to Gold is such a savage way to kick off the album. You've then got the absolutely diabolical, face-melting Burn with Jesus. Track number 2, I should say, of the album. Absolutely monstrous. One of, I'd say, easily one of the best tracks on the album. Again, you get some of those crushing, weighty sort of breakdown riffs. You can hear the bass thundering away at all times. Drumming throughout, very good. Absolutely. You know, lots of gap fills in there. Lots of crushing percussive goodness for all to enjoy. Great start to the album. It's that 1-2, and I think Nailed to Gold flows seamlessly into Burn with Jesus before we then get track number 3, which is the title track, which is an absolute monster of a track in itself. Seriously good. Some of the best guitar work of the album, in my opinion. Some amazing riffs. Kind of overshadowed by the brilliance of I Feel Nothing, track number 4 there, which really does bring a lot more of the kind of doom element, almost like a death doom leaning to that particular track. Seriously ominous. You know, this is diabolical. I think the artwork perfectly kind of represents the music there. That is the image. That is the image that comes to mind. You almost feel like you're down in the very deepest plains of hell listening to an album like this. Freaking great. I Feel Nothing is one of my album highlights. Then we've got Away From God, a great track, a strong track, you know, maybe not one of the standout tracks on the album, but still freaking great, an absolute beast of a track. Towards Earth, another killer track, some seriously phenomenal riff work there, and some cracking vocals as well. What I really love is the kind of the intricacy in the guitar work as well. Really does stand out. You know, there's never just some generic riffs thrown in there. Immolation don't do generic. It is Immolation quality, freaking crushing death metal. Absolutely love it. Under the Supreme, another great track, really strong, punishingly heavy and sinister. Before one of the most sinister tracks on the album. Closing proceedings, we have Christ's Cage. Wow, that is one of the most memorable tracks on the album, without a doubt. Certainly, vocally, it's, you know, this album, I would not say it has catchy choruses or anything like that, but Christ's Cage, that is memorable vocally, lyrically, and extremely freaking catchy. Really, really great track. Some incredible sinister guitar sounds there. Some great leads that really do provide that kind of atmospheric, dark, evil vibe. Absolutely fantastic. Freaking love it. Start to finish, this is such a good album. This is really dark, evil sounding, sinister death metal. And this was 1996, so let's face it, death metal was no longer in its infancy. It was young, 7-8 years in, but this is some of the most evil sounding stuff, certainly that I've heard from that era. And it sounds way ahead in so many respects, in my opinion. I just think that it's a freaking great album, an absolute beast of an album. It's one where you've got a good balance between outright brutality, but also keeping it really interesting, where all of the tracks are distinguishable. They all have their own little key feature, whether it's a fantastic riff here, a really, eye-watering vocal section, whatever it is. It's just great throughout. The album is actually produced by Immolation and Wayne Dorrell. Production assisted by Jim Forbes. Or Forbes. Sounds great. In my opinion, you can't really fault it too much. I wouldn't say that there's any kind of, let down with the production at all. I'd just say it's a solid freaking beast of an old school death metal album. But, as I say, it feels so much heavier than anything else. So that's contender number 1, Here in After. Album number 3, Immolation Failures for Gods, from 1999, is another album which I absolutely love. It's another album that I personally feel is evil, absolutely freaking evil and diabolical, but it's just a cut above what a lot of other bands were doing, in the late 90s. We'll show off our lineup here. So as I mentioned, we've still got the key members of the band here in Robert, and then obviously we've got Ross. Still got Thomas Wilkinson as well, but then we've got Alex. I think it's Alex Hernandez. Yes, Alex Hernandez has replaced Craig by this point. But what you've got here is a couple of things to point out. One is the artwork. As I say, the artwork is very similar, in my opinion, to Here and After. Kind of gives the impression that there's consistency of sound and style, which there most certainly is. And the logo. The logo has changed, and it's become the logo that they have kept for many albums, right up there, up to their more recent albums, although I think it made its reappearance on Atonement. Can't remember on Acts of God, but I think it's more the block capitals. And actually, that was one of the things that really took me by surprise when I discovered Immolation, was that a lot of, pretty much every other death metal band that I was familiar with had, a spiky logo or some sort of unreadable mess, or there was, dripping blood and stuff. Immolation just go for block capitals here, as they did with album number 3. It's just Immolation. It's almost like they're saying, don't really need the support of a spiky cobweb covered logo, because we're just savage and stand out block bold capitals. Nice. But this album, my God, what an absolute beast. Again, it's not an overly long album. It's around the 40-minute mark. Again, it's 8 tracks. Another reason why I felt that this is quite a good head-to-head, because similar length, same number of tracks. This time produced by Paul Orofino and Immolation. Sounds great. Again, I would say that the production isn't as good here as it is on Here and After. And that's only just a minor side note, that I think this album overall sounds a little bit more kind of stripped back, a little bit more sparse than Here and After. But I think owing to the absolute brilliance of the songs that we get here, that tiny point is almost totally overlooked. So the album kicks off with one of the most furiously heavy, freaking bestial tracks just ever. I freaking love it. Once Ordained. Packs an absolute monster of a groovy, crushing breakdown. It's so freaking heavy. It's unreasonable. It's almost dangerously heavy. You know, brain liquidizingly heavy. I would say that overall, in terms of vocals, certainly it becomes evident within the first kind of few vocal lines of Once Ordained, but Ross's vocals are better here on Failures for Gods than on Hereinafter. I think that's pretty definitive. You get that absolute crushing start to the album, a little bit more kind of technicality and intricacy there, and it flows seamlessly into No Jesus, No Beast. They've lost no section, no minute drop of their evil kind of sinister vibe. It sounds freaking evil. You feel like just listening to it is enough to earn you a very uncomfortable place in hell. It's fantastic. Those two tracks, again, just like with Hereinafter, you get these two, the kind of 1-2 absolute beasts of opening tracks. Just the drumming alone is so monstrous here. And I would say that's a little bit of a slight advantage that Hereinafter has, is that, you know, the drumming was great here, absolutely fantastic. But I would say the drum sound on Failures for Gods is so much bigger. It just sounds so much grander, fills up so much more of the mix, which, you know, I wouldn't say that this is a bad mixed album at all, but I would say that it works. It just freaking works. Anyway, absolutely love the drum sound on this album. Failures for Gods, again, evil freaking stuff, kind of bringing in the really dismal, dark, almost death doom kind of vibes there. Sounds fantastic, freaking love it. It's a great title track. It's a bit of a longer song as well, if I remember, sort of in the 6-minute mark, if memory serves, but it's freaking great. A little bit more complex, a little bit more intricate, sounds monstrous. Then we've got track number 4, Unsaved, which is an album highlight for me. I absolutely love that track. Very much rooted in the old school death metal ways there, but the drumming is so driving. It's the riffs that are so freaking monstrous. Absolutely love it. You get a, you know, really good mix in there. God Made Filth, again, we're straight back to the evil. Straight back to the evil sounding stuff there. Absolutely brilliant. Another sort of album highlight, I'd say. Stench of High Heaven. Memorable. Certainly memorable. Certainly in your face and freaking heavy. But again, we come back to that kind of really ominous, sinister vibe. But some cracking vocal work and some cracking riffs. Your Angel Died. How much more blasphemous and just in your face can you get? It's just pure brilliance. Absolutely love it. Crushing throughout, start to finish. Before we close the album with a truly spectacular, brutal punch in the freaking face, we get The Devil I Know, which is a great way to close the album. Another slightly longer track. Does not disappoint one little bit. Not a boring moment there. Not a single riff that isn't ear-catching, you know, and memorable. And I think that's the really surprising thing. When you take 40 minutes and try and fill that with interesting death metal, that's a challenge. Not for Immolation, it isn't. Because this absolutely freaking works. And I think these two albums are, although they are not too far removed, you know, only 3 years apart, and there's a bit of continuity in terms of quite a lot of continuity in terms of the sound and style. There is some key elements to both that are just absolutely delicious, freaking crushing stuff, but kind of work in their favour. So I guess it's come down to the crunch. We've got an album from 1999. Saw the band together for quite a while, obviously up to this point. 4 albums in, they've matured. Maybe they've grown as musicians, maybe they've grown as songwriters. I'd say that there's definitely a noticeable progression between these two albums. But that said, this is still a very progressed album. This is still a very progressed album in the respect that it's well written and it's certainly very well executed. Hereinafter, album number 2 from 1996, is such a strong, absolute beast of an album. I absolutely freaking love it. But which one do I prefer? Now, this is where it gets really challenging, because I will admit that this has taken me a few weeks even to come to this conclusion, that it was going to be these two. There were a few other contenders, but I knew it had to be Immolation from working on that album ranking, as I said. But now that we're down to these two, which one do I prefer? And of course, this is entirely based on my opinion to which one I prefer, not which one is better overall. But I've gone back and forth between Hereinafter and Failures for Gods so many times. It's almost been a consistent back and forth, and I did toy with the idea of calling it a draw because they're both just so freaking good. That said, I thought, no, I chickened out with Immortal and called it a draw with that one. I'm not going to do that this time. So if I'm going to have to pick one of these two albums and say that it is my preferred choice, it is shockingly going to have to be album number 3, Failures for Gods. Now, that was not an easy decision to make, by no means whatsoever. But the only reason, I would say, the only reasons why this album does appeal to me slightly more is a couple of the tracks are absolute favourite Immolation songs, for sure, including Once Ordained, No Jesus, No Beast, Unsaved, God Made Filth. I absolutely freaking love these tracks. I love this album. But also I think that this album really was, although Immolation were very much coming into their sound by Hereinafter, this is where they really did find their footing. And you look at an album like Close to a World Below and then Unholy Cult, quite a few years later, they were definitely just carrying on the progression and the stylistic leanings that they had really laid the foundations to here on Failures for Gods. This is 40 minutes of some of the most evil sounding, brutal, old school death metal. I absolutely freaking love it. I'd also say another key feature is that Ross's vocals here are better than on Hereinafter. The crushing weight of those breakdown riffs are absolutely just colossal on tracks like Once Ordained and No Jesus, No Beast, or Unsaved. It's an absolute monster of an album, and it's one of my favourite Immolation albums for sure. So I would say that in the metal head-to-head, the showdown between Hereinafter and Failures for Gods just about takes the lead. And that's only just because this is a freaking masterpiece. Absolute masterpiece. If you stuck Failures for Gods up against some of the other albums, you know, don't want to say too much, but it might not be coming out on top. But for this metal head-to-head, Failures for Gods, album number 3 does just take the lead. That said, this is a masterpiece. So, my friends, if you were to dare to tackle the head-to-head challenge, Failures for Gods or Hereinafter, which would you be? Which is your preferred Immolation album? Very interested to hear thoughts and opinions of others on this one. Of course, appreciate we all have our own opinions. We're all entitled to our own opinions. This is just based on mine. It's a bit of harmless fun. Feel free to share your opinion, of course, but hey, let's keep this civilized. We're all brethren of the metal here. So if you're not familiar with Immolation, then there is tons of killer albums that you need to check out. They are definitely a band that you need to hear. But I would say that these are 2 albums that you absolutely must hear. This is essential Immolation. Certainly Failures for Gods. If you like a little bit more stripped back, but still involved, still intricate, still technical, or complex, I should say, then this is an album for you. This is beastly. But if you like much more old school death metal, but again, tons of killer grooves and weight, then you're going to dig here and after. So my friends, what are your thoughts and opinions on Immolation? What do you pick in this metal head-to-head? Failures for Gods or Here and After? Please do feel free to share your comments, your thoughts. Always welcome. But thank you very much for watching, my friends. Do feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. The support is very much appreciated. Do check back soon for more reviews and recommendations of all the good heavy things. Until next time, take care of yourselves, my friends, and stay heavy.